Everybody, welcome back to a new video. My name is Janner, your host here for Apology. And as the title suggests, guys, I'm going to be talking about building immersive 3D environments for Blender animations and games. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be breaking this into categories. So we're going to be going into details of what makes good environment and environmental telling. So if you guys are kind of interested on that and want to learn more, well, let's go further. So as I said before, I'm going to be breaking this up into categories. And the first one, guys, is gaming and animation. So one of the first things that you really want to be able to do when it comes to either animation or gaming is being able to be proficient in building environmental worlds. Know and learn what it takes to build an environmental world. And again, you can choose all kinds of sources for this, whether it be YouTube videos or learning online through forums or even books which tell you the theory of environmental storytelling. So there are many approaches to these guys. And as well, you want to be able to learn how to be proficient in using software like Blender, Maya, ZBrush, any of those. So long as you guys are able to learn how to use those programs and be able to be proficient at their features and all the other intricacies that make them what they are, and that could help you a long way. Now, with that, there's a whole host, at least in the case of Blender, there's a whole lot of documentation and a lot of help online, so you'll be able to really quickly be able to use that in no time. I know for myself, I use Blender, and again, like I've told you in other videos, it's been a self-taught experience of 13 years. And what I basically been doing was basically just teaching myself off of YouTube videos, going online and learning theory, game design theory, and going to forums and just speaking with people. And that's essentially what you really want to do, guys. Again, if you're using that approach, that's what you want to use. Now, if you are going to school, obviously you can just learn from your peers or, your professor, anybody. It's a lot more, a little bit much more. You have people with you who can really mingle and communicate. That's not to say that you can't do the same within, you know, a setting like mine. You certainly can. But again, you have that contact in front of you, so it's more instant. And so that's one of the things that you want to watch out for, guys. The next one is Blender animation and gaming. Learn how to create textures and PBRs, guys, and integrate them into your workflow. I can't count how many times I've seen in the case of video games where I usually see textures either popping out or something that doesn't look right and it looks off because it wasn't UV unwrapped correctly. And you know, the animator or sorry, the artist basically just did a lazily job wrapping the textures on a material. And they didn't really put a lot of detail on that material or object in the first place, so it's just gonna look weird. And guys, you want to be able to create these textures or UV unwrap them good in your objects, and as well as this is also, you want to be able to create detailed objects so you can give detail to those objects. And so when you do that, it's not really that noticeable if you do, let's say, put a UV texture. and it's a little bit off, nobody's gonna really notice. You know, it's not really gonna be a big deal. However, if you do it in a wrong way, and I've seen it, guys, I've seen it at least in the case of games, it just doesn't look good. Now, if you guys have seen any sort of these things on animations, let me know, because I really would love to know if this is actually a thing with an animation. I have personally not seen any animations that had kind of strayed that way, but I don't know if that's the case or not. All I'm saying here, guys, is make sure to have your worlds textured correctly when you're going to be unwrapping them and putting materials on the objects. And the next one here, guys, is lighting. Lighting is important to place in your environment as it gives and conveys a message. I can't count how many times I've seen in many video games, or whether it be also animations, where lighting kind of looks off or it just doesn't seem right in some places. But it is integral and important for you guys to light up your scenes in a way that gives it that immersive feel, that for what it is that you're trying to portray. So try to always make sure that the lighting is consistent within your scene, whether you're creating, for example, in Blender, a photo or an animation. Make sure that the lighting is correct, because a little slight off could mean the difference between everything. The next one here, a sense of history, tone, and narrative with objects and environmental details and composition. Always try to keep your environments, whether it be in a video game or in an animation, keep it consistent. Whatever it is that you're trying to convey, whether it be a western or a period piece or a fantasy setting, always try to make sure that what you're trying to portray on screen is what you're trying to convey. There should be no in-betweens or anything else but exactly what you're going to be portraying. Work with others, collaborate, and communicate. Now, this one is a bit tricky for me to kind of talk about, because this is kind of just split into two different categories of individuals: those that are working with much bigger teams versus those that may be working with either less, or like myself, who's just a one person team. If you're working with a group of people in a studio, always try to communicate with either the director, the writer, the set designer, or the level artist, that the main level artist. Always try to communicate with them and try to basically come to an agreement of what it is that you're trying to convey, or at least what the vision of the the head director of the scene is gonna be trying to convey. In the case of, say, one person, pretty much you just gotta mentally put in your mind what it is that you're trying to convey. Cross-reference with any reference that you're trying to look online, or whether you took in the real world, or any notes that you might have taken. And that's really much it. That's pretty much the most simplest way I can really give that one without really getting too much into a long list of things. So I'm just gonna leave it there. For this next one here, in this category, I'm gonna give some examples of 3D environments that you'll probably be working with or trying to execute. For this first one is natural environments. Now, guys, this one is probably going to be filled with lush green grasses or trees, or desert environments, rocky environments, or hilly environments. So it's a really open type of environment. There's not really too much going on. So it's just going to be sort of maybe used in a sort of structure where, depending, for example, if you have an animation, maybe it's used for a sort of storytelling that, you know, it's used for like walking or something of the nature. It just really depends on what the story you're going to be given with in terms of animation. Now, for gaming, it's also kind of used in a sense of, there's a sense of calmness. There's not much of anything going on. Mostly you're taking in the environment. You're just looking around you and there's not much going on. There's many examples of games that use open-ended environments like this. Shadows of the Colossus is a big example of this. uh, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. There's a couple of these examples that I'm trying to give to kind of give you that example of what goes on in these environments. Generally, there's not really too much going on here. Maybe you got, a ruin somewhere trying to invoke a long past empire or something of that nature. But most in general, it's just really sort of a environment that is just used for just not really trying to pick up pace. You're just trying to wind down. Now this one here is urban environment. Now this is probably the one that you'll probably see the most commonly used in movies and as well as in video games. There's a lot of things going on here. You got many different buildings, sights and sounds, and NPCs going about their day. Or even in the case of video games, there's secrets to be found. This one here, you're likely going to be a lot more detailed, and you really want to invoke like I said before, a sense of history, a sense of culture, something that you're going to be trying to make the world as much of immersive as possible, and you're going to invoke that story. And so this one is probably going to be your central focus above all the other environments, because this is probably the environment where maybe your character in that animated film will probably spend most of his time. It just really depends. And in animation, I understand it's different for every animation. Not every animation is the same. I understand it. But generally, what I've usually seen is mostly characters tend to be in urban environments. They're just much more relatable. In the case of video games, this is likely going to be your place where you're going to be spending much of the time. It doesn't matter whether you pick a first person shooter like Call of Duty, for example. You know, much of the levels in those games usually take place in an urban setting. Take the original Modern Warfare 3 or Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, even Call of Duty 4, right? There's examples of that it's usually going to take place in a urban setting. Sure, there are parts, for example, all gillied up doesn't take place in a urban environment, and it's much more of the last one that I explained. But you still see buildings around and things of that nature. Uh, Generally, that's really what you're going to be working with in a game setting. Usually it's going to be either a hub world or whatever. It's just a place where the player is going to spend much of his time. interior spaces. So this one is quite interesting, guys. This is actually one that I would probably consider a sub environment of the urban environment itself. This is likely much more like smaller spaces, so like a room, a car, or something that is much more a smaller space than the urban large, so it's likely a place where, again, if you're making a game like Resident Evil, you're going to make it a saving room where you can store weapons and you can store medicine, all that kinds of stuff. You can even save the game there. Or, in the case of an animation, obviously it's a bit different. So in here, you know, likely to scary movies, so maybe there's something of a suspense that's going on. So you really want to invoke that in your animation. And generally, with these types of spaces, you really want to just keep that sort of consistency wherever or whatever you're trying to make the environment, this type of environment, take place in. And that's essentially the core tenet of this type of environment. And there's really nothing else here. You're not really trying to convey a lot of really things. And in fact, much of this environment, and especially in the case of animation, sometimes it can also be used to kind of convey sort of a storytelling, or kind of giving much more background to the main character of that story. So, maybe you'll see a couple of little things in the environment that kind of tell us who this person is, you know. And that could also be the case in the video game space as well. But generally, like I said before, usually it's used in a gameplay loop. So maybe, for example, like in GTA, you're just using it as a place where you can, change clothing, and that's pretty much it, or just go to your next mission or whatever. There's not really too much of going on, you know, and that's pretty much it for that one. Now, for this category, this one isn't really too much related to the other ones, but more so the development side. Now, I mentioned in my previous video my work process in creating the cyberpunk render scene that I was doing. And this is generally what this category is about. Basically, I'm just reinforcing what I talked about in that video. So let's just get started on this one. The first one, and if you guys again watch my last video, is the blocking out phase. This part, you're just basically trying to picture what it is that you're going to be making, that environment. Again, we're talking about environment, we're not really talking about buildings or anything like that. We're just talking about the landscape of the place. That's what we're doing here. And you want to be able to coordinate with, again, if you're working in a studio, you want to work with your director, or the writer, or somebody like that, somebody who's involved with the sort of narrative side of whether it is an animation or a game, and just cross-reference with them and trying to make the block out feel cohesive. The next part here is pretty much, again, like if you guys seen my last video, is pretty much the modeling part. This part is going to be much more the one that you're going to be spending more time in. So you're going to be fleshing out the blocks of the world. You're going to give them much more detail. You're going to create buildings if you're making it take place in an urban environment, or even if you are taking it in a sort of a much more natural environment, there may be some ruins that you're gonna have to make, you know. So you're gonna have to deal with that, and you're gonna have to again cross-reference, you know, with concept art or storyboards when it comes to animation, and you just want to basically want to model the world exactly like those references. That's all you're doing in that part. And lastly but not least is the texturing. Now this part is usually mostly reserved for your artist or level artist, somebody like that. And they're basically just gonna go and basically UV wrap textures onto the models or so forth and so on. And what they're basically gonna be doing, guys, is basically just make the worlds much more lived in. That's all they're doing, and they're also obviously trying to put their own creative spin with the worlds and just basically trying to finalize everything here. And that's the end of all the criterias, guys. That is pretty much it. Guys, let me know down below what you guys think, and let me know what your experiences was like with dealing with making environments for either an animation or a video game. I would really like to know what you guys went through and really talk about it and debate it. And yeah, guys, that's pretty much it. This is Janner. Until the next video, signing out.